Saving America from socialism. Do you see the signs of socialism? They're everywhere. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Look around. Socialism is everywhere. We just don't call it that. And the bigger threat, aside from not calling something what it is, the bigger threat is the fact that youth are calling socialism what it is, and in America, embracing it. That's the peril to America's long-term freedoms. I want to give a quick shout out to Edify.app. It is the online platform for faith-based podcasts, and I'm happy to say Bold and Blunt is among its esteemed offerings. And you can also get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. Just find my name, my hyperlinked name on the website there. Click on it and scroll to the bottom, and you'll find some easy directions on how to sign up for my 3 times a week Washington Times newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it includes not only my commentaries that I write all week at the Washington Times, but my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts, which you can also get anywhere podcasts are offered. Socialism in America. You know, Donald Trump nailed it when he said from the campaign trail, well, Republicans were hushing about this. Nobody wanted to use the dirty S word. Donald Trump just called it out what it is. The big threat facing America was socialism. Exactly right. Precisely correct. Listen to this, excerpts from a Politico opinion piece from September of 2018. The headline, "What would a socialist America look like?" Well, I can answer that in one word: dark. Because when liberty dies, darkness takes over. So anyhow, Politico magazine asked thinkers on the left and a couple of outliers to describe their vision for a reimagined American economy. Had they interviewed me, I'm sure I would have been considered an outlier. Because if you in America right now have a solid grasp of the history of America, the founding of America, and what founding fathers intended America to be, then you're considered an outlier if you insist that your government adhere to those guidelines. It's okay to know your history. It's okay to know that founding fathers wanted a concept of limited government where individuals' rights come from God and government's only there in a subservient role to preserve and protect those rights. It's okay to know that. You just can't demand that government adhere to those principles. That's what makes you an outlier. So from Politico, just a decade ago, I'm reading right from this piece, socialism was a dirty word in American politics. And let me sidestep real quickly. Yes, it was. As it should be. The fact that it isn't anymore, the fact that we have open socialists serving in America's political systems, not just in the U.S. Congress, but also in various state and local governments' capacities around the nation, that is an offense to our Constitution. That is a slap in the face to every brave patriot in America who died for the cause of American liberties, who died in defense of the Constitution, who died in defense of the Constitution that these socialists swear by way of an oath of office to uphold and protect. How can a socialist defend the Constitution? By the very definition of socialism, a socialist is already busily undercutting the Constitution by serving in America's political system. You can't be a socialist and protect the Constitution at the same time. The two things don't meet. Back to this piece. Look, I only got one line into it. Debates over its merits. We're referring to the word socialism again. Debates over its merits were mostly limited to obscure blogs niche magazines, and political parties on the other side of the Atlantic. But more recently, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and a handful of other politicians have breathed new life into the label, injecting a radical, alternate vision for the U.S. economy into the mainstream political debate. See, this writer at first acknowledges that it's a radical, alternate vision for America, and then goes on to say that yes, indeed, it has been injected into mainstream political debates. That's a travesty. Socialists belong in the corner with the cockroaches and rats, hiding, waiting until nighttime for their heads to rear, to come out of the corner. Because as I said, socialists don't belong in America's political system. They don't belong representing American citizens in a political capacity, on taxpayer dimes. They just don't. This is what they envision. One way to implement socialism in the United States would be to copy many of the economic institutions found in the Nordic countries of Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Well, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie because these countries aren't pure socialist, okay? So let's just put that to rest. They're more like welfare states. They're not fully socialist. They do this quasi-socialist thing, and really they've stepped away. They experimented with socialism and stepped back into more freer markets. Why? Because socialism fails everywhere you go. Here's another nugget from this piece. Democratic socialism is about expanding democracy. Lie once again. Democratic socialism, democratic socialists, the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, they're not about expanding democracy. They're about ushering in socialism, which is another way of saying ushering in communism, because socialism is just the slower sister of communism. You don't just stand there in socialism for long, because once socialism crumbles, that opens the door for government to enter, to come in once again and proclaim loudly, "We have the solutions. We'll just take over everything," and become communist, because who knows best how to distribute resources and private properties? Like the government. So the government creates the problem of socialism by stepping where it's not supposed to step into individual liberties. And then when the socialism fails, government comes in promising to be the savior of the broken system they themselves ushered in. And their so-called solution, and I'm doing air quotes right now on solution, on the word solution, their so-called solution is to go even bigger with the socialism. Let's go full-blown communism. In the short term, socialists, I'm reading again from this piece, like liberals. Well, see, liberals, socialists, same thing. There you have it. They want to protect, strengthen, and expand social services and public goods. That's from the piece. Now here's my commentary on that. Sure they do, because it's easy to spend other people's money. If they truly cared about the downtrodden, they would reach into their own pockets and provide from their own resources. But that's hard. That's hard to do because it takes out of their own pockets. And socialists don't want to do that. They don't want to be poor. Socialists don't want to be poor. They just want to take wealth from other people and give it to those who have less, so they can not only keep their own resources, keep their own money, but pat themselves on the back and talk about how great they are about saving so-and-so and giving to so-and-so, but not with their resources. Establishing democratic socialism, again from Politico, means democratizing ownership of capital, our jobs, and our personal lives. That is terrifying to patriotic, freedom-loving Americans. The word democratizing, it sounds so soft and fuzzy, doesn't it? Who doesn't want a democratic society? Well, this is what they envision. And I'll just read the next line. Socialists believe that if you work somewhere, you should have a say in how it's run through unions, worker councils, and elected boards. This is possible at the company level today. Furthermore, if your labor generates profit under socialism, you would have an ownership stake and a democratic say in how your workplace is run. Well, isn't that nice? So somebody goes out and they build a business from the ground level up. They work, their blood, their sweat, their tears go into that business. Their 15-hour days, their 18-hour days, their 20-hour days, 7 days a week go into building that business up. It starts from the garage or a backyard or an office in the home, and then it expands into a larger office, and then it expands eventually into a corporation. Why? Because people love the service or product that individual who poured his or her sweat, blood, and tears into the business, that individual offered. So after 20 years of building the business, suddenly that individual is getting some financial gain, seeing some riches from his or her efforts. That's how it works in a free market. And that's the moment when the socialist wants to come in crying the crocodile tears about not having the same advantages that this business owner had in life. And therefore, this business owner needs to provide for those less fortunate. And so how do they do that? Well, back to this piece. Through unions, worker councils, and elected boards. They demand that this business owner bring in unions who can represent the worker class, because after all, that business owner is just a lucky SOB who drew the golden card in life, born with a silver spoon in his or her mouth. As Barack Obama would say, you didn't build that. And it was the workers who actually made this business owner great. Let's discount the idea, the socialist says, that these workers received a benefit for working for this business owner by way of a salary, by way of wages, by way of a paycheck, perhaps by way of benefits, health care, other benefits, retirement funds, perhaps. Vacation days, paid holidays. Even if they don't, even if it was a crappy job where they were worked 60 hours a week, or where, let's put it more truthfully, where they were offered 60 hours a week to work and they were paid minimum wage. So what? Who made them work there? Did that business owner go to their homes, hold a gun to their heads and say, get to work? No, it was voluntary. And if you don't like your job, quit crying about it and get a better job. And if you don't have the skills or talents for a better job, quit crying about that and go to school or go to training or go into some mentoring program or take an internship or just figure it out on your own how to get a better job and to become that wealthy business owner. But socialists don't like that. Socialists, back to this piece, want to establish unions, worker councils, and elected boards. And then these union members, council members, and board members would sit there in their office provided by their business owner, by their businessman or woman, and cry about how they actually helped this business owner become wealthy, and so now they need a stake of the business. They need a portion of the business. That's socialism. And that's a rot on American society. It's a cancer on the soul. It's a soul-sucking darkness. And in America, guess what? Youth are embracing socialism. You know why? Because they're not told the truth about it, which is why I love my guest today. He tells the truth specifically to youth, to the very next generation of America's leaders. He goes to college campuses and talks to youth about the evils of socialism. His name is George Harbison. He's actually a retired chief financial officer. But in 2013, he wrote a piece for Forbes that debunked Warren Buffett's claim that his federal tax rate was well below the rate paid by lower paid office workers. Interesting enough. But from that, he began to do some public speaking in 2016 at the request of Young America's Foundation. He created this presentation entitled The Victims of Socialism, and he presented it. And since, he's been presenting similar type talks, mostly to Young America's Foundation youth leaders and youth groups at college campuses. So, George, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, you're very welcome, Cheryl. It's great to be joining you today.
So your passion is fighting back on socialism. Tell me why socialism is bad for America.
Sure, Cheryl. So it's just a little bit of background. If I've done a presentation on the victims of socialism, and I've presented it at about 25 college campuses across the country over the last 4 to 5 years. And I produced that and have delivered it because it's just so scary to me that the history that took place in the 20th century is being repeated again. And it scares me. I see it creeping back in everything that we're seeing recently. We see it with the cultural Marxism. We see it with the chaos and anarchy in the streets. And it just was something that I became passionate about, educating young people about this awful ideology.
And you perform such a valuable service because, honestly, it's the young people who are being told that America is a racist country, that founding fathers were racist, and it needs to be dismantled from the top down, and a new system of socialism or communism is the better way for America to go. So how do you speak to young people in a way that they understand the horrors of socialism?
Now, that's a great question. And in relaying the history to them, I put it in terms of the numbers. So in my presentation, I relay what happened in Russia and the Soviet Union, and I take the death toll and I equate it to the current populations of American states. And I do that with China. And of course, China's death toll was the combined current populations of the states of California and Texas. And I tell the students, just think about that. Everybody in Houston, Dallas, LA, San Francisco, San Diego, and more, dead. And they're surprised and shocked that they have never heard this and never were aware of the death toll of socialism when they are told that socialism has been perfected in Scandinavia, which is just an outright lie.
Now talk about that, because I've heard it myself. Scandinavia, Denmark, and other countries are actually given as great examples of socialism working. What's the big lie with that?
Well, they are certainly more, they would be construed to be social welfare systems, a lot more benefits paid for by the state. But you got to understand that what socialism is, and again, in Marx's theory, what socialism is the process by which capitalist countries are converted to communist countries, where communist is a state-free, class-free utopia. And socialism is the process by which countries get from one state to the other. And to get there, the private property has to be eliminated. Well, I can guarantee you that private property has not been eliminated in Scandinavian countries. And on and on and on, the elimination of the family unit, people told where to go, where to work, how to live, and again, the elimination of private property hasn't happened. But there's a index that the Heritage Foundation puts out every year, which is the Index of Economic Freedom. And the Scandinavian countries rank quite high on that scale, and almost, actually, one of the Scandinavian countries in the latest poll, Iceland, study, Iceland was higher than the United States. But all the Scandinavian countries' economic freedom index is very close to that of the United States. And the United States, by the way, their measure on the index has been falling over the recent years.
So the big lie is they're not even socialist nations, yes?
No, they're not. They were more to the left and closer to that in the 70s, and they realized that their standard of living was going down dramatically. But I can guarantee you that IKEA is not owned by the government of Sweden. But that's what socialism is. With the elimination of religion as well is another facet of socialism. That hasn't happened as far as I know, in Denmark and Iceland.
I share your concerns about growing socialism in America, and one of the things I find most frustrating is how the left cleverly disguises its socialism by calling it something else. They call it progressivism or democratic socialism, that it's not the same thing. I know you must hear that rationale as well, and I wonder, how do you counter that?
Yeah, that's another great question, and I wish I had my presentation right in front of me, Cheryl, but I go down in the example of democratic socialism. You can put a word in front of socialism, and you may think that you're eliminating the stench, but you're not. And I go through the examples of, and I wish I had the presentation, but the People's Republic, Democratic Republic of Kampuchea. Well, that was Cambodia, and the Democratic, East Germany had a fancy name with the word democratic in it.
Right.
And of course, East Germany was the country where dozens, if not hundreds, of people were slaughtered trying to get from East Berlin to West Berlin into freedom. So you can put that word democratic in front of socialism. It doesn't change the underlying awfulness of the ideology.
Could you talk for a moment, because to me, in the work I do, one of the most important aspects of American culture to preserve is the idea of individual rights coming from God, from a creator, and not just, handed out by government. Can you talk for the moment about the link between an active, thriving church community or base of believers and individual liberties? How are those two things linked?
Yeah, I think the idea that our rights are given to us by our God is important, and it becomes, that is, in those inalienable rights, as our founders identified, that's what government is here to protect. It's not to provide goodies. It's not to provide elements of living that make everybody equal. It's simply to protect the inalienable rights that are provided to us by our Creator. And that idea of a Creator and rights from the Creator goes hand in hand with a strong and vibrant religious outlook.
So when you talk to young people about this, what kind of response do you get? Do they understand that link? Do they get the history of America?
They don't, because they haven't been taught it. And I mentioned earlier in this conversation, they haven't been taught about socialism and the death toll and what it really is. And they're not really taught about this miraculous thing that is our country, that was based on that idea. And they are taught the opposite. They are taught that we're evil, that we fostered slavery, and we slaughtered Native Americans. And when that comes up in my conversations with them, I point out that those things were not good, but that was not freedom, and that was not capitalism. That was really us taking a step into the socialist playbook and commandeering people's lives and taking away their freedom. So don't try to equate what happened with slaves and Indians to capitalism or the American ideal.
That's brilliant. I never thought of it that way. That's really interesting how you put that on. That's really interesting. Good for you.
Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed that one, Cheryl.
So what's your take when I'm not sure how many youth you've spoken to. Maybe you can address that point as you answer this question. But what's your take on the optimistic outlook of America insofar as looking where the youth will lead us, tomorrow's leaders will lead us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can't help but get discouraged at times based upon everything that's happened in the summer of 2000 and the leftward leaning of American students and the absolute craziness that I've witnessed it firsthand on campuses when I've gone to speak, where we've had to have armed guards at schools like Southern California or the University of Utah. And it's scary. And by the way, the very worst one that I did was at McGill University in Montreal, where I was actually a little bit fearful of my well-being.
Really?
But then you get to interact with the students, and you realize there is a large contingent of them that do get it. Now they're shoved into corners and hiding in nooks and crannies on their college campuses because of the awful liberal progressive orthodoxy that prevails on college campuses, but they are there. And so I do get some offset to the being scared by witnessing and interacting with these brave students who do understand what America was built upon and what American ideals actually are. And I use the words with them. I said, we hear about white privilege, and it's a pejorative and it's a false one. But what we do have is American privilege. And that privilege is to be in a country where we are able, at least used to be able, to be protected and have our rights protected by our government. And that indeed is American privilege. And if you don't know what that is, then you are part of the problem.
I get a little bit pessimistic as well when I see particularly youth nowadays in Northern Virginia where I live, and there are no more face mask mandates or anything like that. And yet I see these young people just a week ago standing at their bus stops with face masks on or driving down the road in cars by themselves wearing face masks. And I think, if these youthful people are so reliant on government to tell them what to do, what kind of leaders are they going to make for America in the future? So I get a little pessimistic looking at these outcomes of the coronavirus.
Yeah, and I do share that. I would tell you, though, there are those out there that do not adhere and have not been totally taken in by the left's view on and their reaction to the COVID pandemic. There are students that are out there. I see them, I interact with them, and they tell me there are more. And I've actually helped 2 schools start up YAP campus chapters on their campuses, and it's been very gratifying to see the students coming in out of the shadows and finding other like-minded students and being more comfortable displaying their conservative values.
And when you say YAF, for those who don't know, that's Young America's Foundation.
That's right. That's why most of my speaking has been at YAP events in Santa Barbara or YAP-sponsored events on college campuses. Thanks, Cheryl.
So when you speak to students, I know that there must be questions that come forward about what to do, how to fight against socialism in America. And aside from generating awareness about the various ways socialism is already here in America, how do you recommend these students go forward and fight it?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I get that question almost every time I speak. And it's easy for me to say, speak your mind and don't be intimidated. But the problem on college campuses is that they are so left-leaning and the professors have so much power that there are very, very many instances where students literally have their grades impacted by their political views.
Wow.
But nonetheless, it's like, no, you need to stand and make your feelings known in a positive
So was there a specific moment in your own personal history that made you sit up and say, I've got to get involved, I've got to fight for America, I've got to help tomorrow's leaders of America understand the exceptionalism of this country? Was there a singular event?
That's a great question. I initially wrote about tax matters, Cheryl, and I had several articles written on Forbes.com, Real Clear Markets, Real Clear Politics, and the American Thinker website. And but one aha moment was early on, and the nature of my writing was I debunked leftist tax myths. And the very first one I did was on Warren Buffett. And that was an aha moment when I really dove into his contention about his tax rate being half that of his lower paid office workers. And I figured out how he had contorted the numbers and manipulated them in a very, very deceitful and dishonest way. And this is Warren Buffett. This is the Oracle of Omaha. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what is happening when this kind of a message gets so widely dispensed without any kind of pushback? What else is going on? And then I will tell you another time, the very first time I delivered The Victims of Socialism, it was at the University of California, Riverside, and I delivered it, and at the end of the presentation there was dead silence. And I didn't know if it was because they thought they didn't like the presentation, or they were just struck by what they saw and couldn't speak, and it was the latter. But actually, after the presentation, I was mingling with the audience, and a woman came up to me, and she said, and she was not a student, but she said, I want to thank you for telling the story of my country. And she was crying, and the hairs on my arm went up, because I knew that she was Cambodian. And she said, yes, I was at the collectives. I was in Cambodia when Pol Pot took over. My family was marched to collectives where two of my sisters died and my father was murdered. And that was a moment when I said, these students across the country do not know this stuff, and they need to know it.
You know, our time's almost up, but there's an important question out there that sometimes I don't really know how to address, because it seems to me that Americans who have been given everything have a difficult time understanding those who are much less fortunate or who live in absolute tyranny. And I think part of that is because good people can never fully grasp the concept of evil. They always think, but if this person just had this opportunity, then this person wouldn't do that. But I look at socialism as really a seed of evil. How do you explain to people the absolute lust for power that some people have that just drives them, and it really doesn't matter to them about individual freedoms?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. One of the things, it's a super ego. You know, they think they know how to run people's lives better than they do, and they want to use their elite power to put together a system where there is no inequality. But what they forget and what they never take into account is inequality is part of the human situation. And you can never force people to be equal because they're not. But also, keeping in mind that the evilness, I mean, it has been over and over every time that socialism has been tried, and this power has been impacted over the people of a country. This devastatingly bad end result happened. And I refer quite a bit in my presentation to the Black Book of Communism. And those folks, the French scholars that put that book together, estimated that 100 million human beings died in the 20th century as a result of socialism and communism.
Wow. And do you have, just quickly, do you have a hard time convincing younger people of the evils of socialism?
You know, I don't, to be honest. I mean, I think that the presentation And my response to those that say it hasn't been perfected, meaning that the results could be different, is just a recitation of the definition of insanity, meaning trying the same thing over and over and expecting some sort of different result. With socialism, there is never a different result.
George Harbison, where can people find this presentation on YouTube, and when are your upcoming speaking events? Can people come to Young America's Foundation speaking events anytime in the future and see you there?
My lectures, there are a number of them up on YouTube. Interestingly enough, Cheryl, the last one that was done in December of 2021 was age restricted by YouTube, so it got somewhat canceled. And the interesting thing is that lecture was delivered to 100 students. Every one of them was under the age of 18.
Oh, geez.
So, and I would encourage your students. I'm speaking in July, in mid-July, July 15th to be exact, in Washington, D.C. at a YAP event. But I think that one's going to be, it's already booked solid. It's for interns in the conservative organizations in the area. But I guess one way that students, if they want to see the presentation live, would be to look for me on the YAP does their event on their website. They list their events, and those events are live streamed.
Right.
And there's also live questioning that goes on during the presentation.
So how do people find you on YouTube? Just by your name, doing a search?
Yeah, I would just search George Harbison, that's Harbison, and Socialism, and you'll see about 15 or 20.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt, but more importantly, thank you for the work you do. It's the youth that we need to capture for America's future successes. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Cheryl, and I appreciate the great work you do at the Washington Times. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, socialism. Nothing gets me going like talking about socialism and socialists who, once again, for those in the back of the room who may have missed me saying this earlier, who don't belong in America's politics. They can't take an oath to the Constitution without lying. Anyhow, if you like Bold and Blunt, go to edify.app. That is the online platform for your faith-based podcast, where Bold and Blunt is now offered. You can also get Bold and Blunt anywhere podcasts are offered, including the Washington Times. And one more quick note. If you like to hear me rail about socialists and socialism and how crappy socialism is and doesn't belong in America, why not read about it as well? I've got a new book out called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. In case this half hour about socialism didn't do it for you, pick up a copy of the book and find out more how socialists are trying to cripple America, crumble our Constitution, and kill the souls and creativity and God-given talents of our youth. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.